I'm Amanda McGill Johnson with Nebraska Coalition for Life-Saving Cures, otherwise known as Nebraska Cures. And we're very excited today to host a panel discussion for Women's History Month on the current status of women in science in the state of Nebraska. We have four wonderful guests here with us. Sasha Forsen from Bio Nebraska. She's their assistant director and is in charge of their Women in STEM initiative. We have Dr. Sara Myers. She's the UNO Vice Chancellor of Research and Creative Activity. Hello, Dr. Myers. We have Dr. Priscila Rodrigues Armijo, the UNMC Assistant Professor for Research in the Department of Surgery. She's also the co-president of their We Strive initiative. And we have her co-president, Dr. Geetanjali Rathore. She is a UNMC Associate Professor of Pediatric Neurology. So thank you very much for all four of you taking the time to visit with us today. Just a word to our attendees, please use the Q&A box to drop questions to us. I have several pre-planned questions, but we're happy to take questions from the crowd as well. And also, just so you know, this is being recorded so that we can share it on our social media and on our website at a later date. So thank you all for attending and for participating. I'm going to launch right into just a very general discussion about how you would describe the current status of women in science in the state of Nebraska and where you think we are in terms of gender equity. I know I've looked into research on this, and there isn't a lot of research collected right now about this. So I'm interested in your thoughts on where you think we are. Anyone want to start off?
Sure. I'm happy to start. So I think I'm very proud to be a woman in science in Nebraska, and it's a great place that knows that women have strengths in maybe non-traditional roles for women. For example, growing up on a farm in central Nebraska, I got all of the opportunities to do things on a farm that boys would usually do. And I think because of that, I was able to have that confidence in pursuing science careers, that I can do what the men can do. And you see that with women in agriculture and other sciences as well across the state. It doesn't mean it's perfect or that all things are equal. I think obviously in kind of an engineering related field, oftentimes I'm one of very few women at the table, et cetera. So it's not like I'm always at home as a scientist in my field, but I do think that there's a lot of good opportunities here in Nebraska.
Yeah, I would agree with Sara. If you look at the numbers, they're not always encouraging, but I would say if you ask in one word, I would say it's an exciting time because of the awareness. And I think just like the program that you're organizing today, there's a lot of awareness, and I think the women are trying to collate together and kind of promote each other. That's kind of what We Strive is trying to do too. So, just for an example, the last, promotion and tenure thing we did in our department, more than 50% of the candidates were women physicians. So, I think that awareness and trying to promote each other has really helped. And just over even the last 10 years, I see the trend changing. I think women are trying to step up and kind of, help each other and are definitely going up the ladder much faster. So I would say it's an exciting time.
Sasha, can you let people know what Bio Nebraska is and the reach that you have and a little bit about what you've heard in terms of that status of women?
Absolutely. So my background is not in science. So I'm not a doctor or a scientist, but my background is in advocacy. And my background is I've also been a woman in a very male dominated workplace. And so I bring that perspective. But what we do at Bio Nebraska is we advocate for Nebraska's bioecosystem that exists of 90 different organizations, about 90, that we advocate for. That includes the university system, lots of startups, established companies all across Nebraska, biotech, bioscience, agriculture. It's incredibly broad. And through that, our board really wanted to start talking about women in STEM. I think like the others said, it's not always, the numbers aren't always great, but there's so much opportunity. Dr. Rathore, you mentioned exciting. And I think that's really where it is that being in a community like Nebraska, it really feels like we can start facilitating change and progress. And so Women in STEM was just an annual luncheon, and we have grown it to offer professional development opportunities throughout the year. We talk about mentorship, finding a career after graduating from college, entrepreneurship. And the reason we're doing those is because I've talked to so many women about their experiences. And so we're trying to cater programs based on what people are really looking for and something that would be very useful to them.
Cool. Why do you think that gender equity, or does it differ between different career levels? So maybe there are more women that are applying and starting out, but are you seeing a difference at different levels of education?
Yeah, so I will jump in here. First, thank you so much for the opportunity for this panel. This is critical and really important. I agree with everyone that we have a momentum here. We have awareness and we have people willing to change. But I also want to emphasize that we're not there yet. There's a lot of change to be made. There's a lot of leadership policy change to be made. And coming back to your question, Amanda, regarding the differences in different career stages, yes, that's very prominent there. So if we look, for example, in science, we have 50%, actually more than 50% of women now entering the STEM, the pipeline. But when we look at faculty, for example, in academic and healthcare centers, the number decreases to less than a quarter when we reach higher leadership positions or a higher ranking, such as associate professors or full professors. So there is an increase. We are attracting women to this field, but we are not able, for some reason, to retain or to maintain or even to advance the career for them. So there is definitely a gender inequity when we go up the levels.
Exactly. Yeah, Priscila, actually, some of the numbers, like you mentioned, it's more of a national study where the National Science Foundation, where they looked at, and they were seeing more than 50, actually close to 60% of bachelor's, master's, and PhDs were women. And when we start even at an assistant professor level, it already dropped down to 40%. And then as you get up to professor, it's close to 15%. So you know, women, even though they are having higher accomplishments, grades, you know, more awards, everything is higher, but we're unable to retain them. So they're never able to reach the leadership or the higher positions. And again, you know, it's the problem. We've got better at attracting women to the careers, but we're still not doing a great job retaining and promoting them to higher positions. So I completely agree with that.
What do you think are some of the barriers that are leading to those struggles in retaining women?
I think everybody would agree. The first one would be work-life balance. And I think each one of us, for any interview we go or anywhere, the first question is asked, so how do you manage the work-life balance? So, you know, it's there, it's a reality. And, you know, that's something that I feel, you know, it depends a little bit on changing the culture of your organization, where it could be made a little more conducive, you know, and then again, women helping women or promoting, or, you know, organizations helping women navigate that a little better and saying, you know, it's okay, this is how I did it, maybe you could do it this way. One of the organizations I was looking, it was more for grant writers and researchers, but they even proposed that maybe part of the grant should also include childcare, that you could use part of your grant for childcare, or, you know, organizations should try to have a in-house childcare so that you're not, you know, struggling with that, maybe that could help. So I think making policies that help it become a little more family friendly would maybe help retain and help make it easier life balance. And I think that gap was even widened and shown even more gaping difference with the pandemic this year. You know, that it was obvious, but now it's even more obvious that the burden came a lot more on the women rather than our male counterparts.
Something that we're working on an institutional grant to investigate this a little bit more. And we're really interested in the impact of social networks. So I think one of the contributors to women not being as successful as they move up in leadership is because the structures to help assistant professors be successful are very detailed and organized in terms of reappointment and promotion to associate professor. But then there's a lot less structure, and it could depend a lot on who the department chair is, if that's a woman or someone who is at least supportive of women, and somebody that provides direction. So the fewer leaders we have that are women who have advanced up the chain, you know, the less people we have to continue to support associate professors and, you know, give them that advice in terms of how to continue advancing and managing work-life balance. So that's something we want to investigate and see if it's possible to make sure there's some consistency in how promotion and continued leadership opportunities are presented to women beyond the assistant professor level. So I don't have a lot of answers, but that's something that we've at least identified as a problem, and hopefully we can find how to make a solution to that.
Yeah, so the leadership is one of the biggest barriers right now, the lack of diversity in leadership. So this is true not only in academic centers, but if you think, for example, nonprofits, we know that less than 25% of board directors are women. And if you think about women of color, less than 20% are women. Although majority of nonprofits actually are ensuring that or are trying to recruit a diverse board. But if you look at those, a quarter of them are all white males, right? Caucasian males. If we look, for example, at the Fortune 500 companies, less than 15% are actually women in terms of board directors, and less than 3% are women of color. So if we don't have a diversity in the board, how can we ensure that policies are being diverse? How can we ensure we are retaining and we are hiring a diverse employee population? And also the stereotype, it's unfortunately also embedded in our culture, right? So when we look at the studies that, for example, look at letters of recommendation, just the adjectives or the words that they use to describe males versus or women versus men are totally different, right? So when we look at men or all of the male related adjectives, they are all objectives. They are competent. They are hard work. They are, you know, all related to what we look in a leader. But when we look at the woman counterpart, they all relate to nurturing, they're caring. And it's a culture that for us, we automatically think that women are more family based, they're more friendly, whereas the males, the men, they are important for the role. So if we don't change that stereotype, then we will not be able to change the culture, right?
Yeah, and that's where you know, the double bind comes. It's like, you know, if you're nice and, you know, if you're nurturing, which you're supposed to be, you know, that's your stereotype as a woman, then you're considered, well, you know, they're not a leader, or they're not strong enough to lead the whole team or division or whatever. And if you're actually imposing or you're trying to be more authoritative or leading, then you're, you know, labeled as difficult to work with, or, you know, you're not feminine enough, you know, you're trying to be a male amongst, you know, the leaders. So so that's definitely a hard balance, where do you balance? And that also sometimes brings in that feeling of being an imposter syndrome. I know it's talked a lot about, where you're trying to be someone you're not, or you're trying to hide who you are, and you feel uncomfortable, and it's not made easier by your surroundings. I don't think everybody at the workplace makes it easier for you to work either. Somebody had once mentioned, we were talking about how do we change the culture, how do we make it more inclusive, and somebody said, you know what, just enforce the laws that are already there. There's an anti-discrimination law. You cannot discriminate based on gender, race, color. If we just enforce that, that would be a great start. The law is already there. But when they look at, if you consider lab space, compensation, salary, support, staff, even getting PhD students, there's a discrepancy. The women faculty or the women researchers are getting less of everything, even though they're at the same position, they might be on the same project. But when they're allocating the resources, the women are getting lesser. And they actually did a study at MIT where they looked at their own institution and they found that gap. So it's like, well, maybe we should just start actually including more and not looking at gender, and just based on merit and accomplishments, try to distribute resources, try to include everybody so that they have an equal opportunity and they're not made to feel that maybe I don't belong here.
I think what everyone's saying is really spot on. Just a couple things to add to build off of what everyone else is talking about. Harassment as well, it really goes along with the discrimination and male-dominated cultures that we're often in. And, we're looking at, in some industries, women leaving at a rate twice as fast as men. And so harassment is obviously a huge contributor to that. And then also what everybody is saying, coming back to a point that somebody mentioned about, girls in school and at the high school level and the college level, they're performing so well, but we're not seeing that impact in the workplace. It just keeps trickling down and down and down. And then as a result of all these issues that we're talking about, one of the most important things as a girl is to see people that look like you doing these type of roles. And, as a person who's advocating for these roles, a lot of times it's difficult for me to find a leader in STEM, even among our membership. And so, it's so important. It's just interesting, this cycle that we end up being in. And then of course, how it impacts in academia. If we don't have diverse and gender inclusive voices doing these research or applying for these grants, there are huge communities that are missed because they're not taking into consideration, because they're not leading the charge on so many of these efforts.
On this topic, we've got a question in our Q&A section. As a woman of color, I often find myself finding obvious and also internal stereotypes used against me, both in my family and in work. How can I stand up for myself without being pushed back or down, seeming too aggressive? Does anyone have any thoughts on that? I know that's a tricky and difficult one.
Right. So again, first you're fighting the bias of being a woman, and then you have to fight on top of that. You're also a woman of color, so you're further down in the minority. And I don't think there's an easy solution to this. I wish there was. So first thing would be, look at your institution and policies. Are there policies already in place? Does your HR department have, a place where if you're truly encountering these kind of biases, is there a place where you can report? Or your supervisors? Again, depends on the comfort level. Where is that bias coming from? If it is your immediate supervisors, then you're again in a hard spot, and might be HR where you have to go. And then in general, I feel, as women, we already work harder to show we're equal. And then, if you're a woman of color, you have to then, break some other stereotypes and still work a little bit harder. So I wish it wasn't that way, but that's one thing that we have to do. But we have to keep advocating and not give up, and try to find resources within your departments or divisions, organizations. And that's kind of what we're trying to do with We Strive to, is kind of form that networking, form that support. If somebody's encountering something and they're not comfortable to report within their organization or within their department, there are other women that can reach out to say, hey, I am encountering this. What should I do? Where can I go? And maybe find that support that way.
Sorry, go ahead, Sara.
Well, just quickly, I'm a really straightforward person. And I think that one approach could be, just when you encounter these types of behaviors or policies, go to those individuals who put them in place and say, why was this policy written like this? From my perspective, it feels, like more of a stereotype, or it impacts my family and my work in this way. It's quite likely that perhaps people didn't realize or didn't understand how it would impact different groups. So I think that's a non-confrontational, it's not an aggressive way, but it's still very straightforward and would also require a straightforward answer. And then one other thing, I'm a really big fan of finding, an ally, a mentor who you can ask specific situations, what should I do about this, and get some guidance.
Yeah, what I was going to add first is, for those who are unfamiliar with Strive, this is an organization of women for both faculty and staff at University of Nebraska Medical Center and Nebraska Medicine. So we work with changing policy, promoting and advancing women in leadership, as well as community. Another strategy for those who suffer microaggressions, because most of the times it's not only a very direct harassment, but you keep suffering those microaggressions on a daily basis. So one strategy could be, if someone is asking you a question that made you feel uncomfortable, just repeat that question back to the person. So saying, so you were asking me that, and you repeat the question. Most of the times that will make that person realize that what they asked is actually a microaggression, and they will probably change the subject. And then you weren't rude, you wasn't rude, or you didn't report that in an aggressive manner. The other thing is, another really common kind of microaggression we suffer is the mansplaining, right? So some of the times, and we have that actually in paper, looking at how that actually happens. It has been documented that if you have one woman on the table and that woman comes up with a brilliant idea, more often a man will jump in and state the same idea, maybe paraphrasing it, and that person will receive the credit. So a strategy for you could be, once everyone is done talking, you can just rephrase that again and saying, thank you for agreeing with me. That's what I meant. So again, you're just bringing back that to the teamwork level without being rude and aggressive. So I just really want to mention those two strategies because they seem to work in a work environment.
I'm getting more questions in the Q&A section. The next one is, the transformative leader, which encompasses more of what has been deemed female characteristics, are now more sought after in many organizations. Many women in leadership roles also support a male transactional paradigm, as that is what was taught and supported. How can women in leadership roles be more mindful of promoting these more female characteristics as being worthy attributes for leaders?
So I would agree. I think the model of leadership is slowly changing. It's not, somebody said, to lead is not, you're not telling people what to do, but you're listening to them and you're helping them build and grow. So you're helping, and again, the women are great at nurturing. That's what we're stereotyped as, nurturing. So I think, how we can, I think first thing would be being the role model. So if the leader is a woman and she's showing that it's okay to be feminine and still lead, you still have the brilliance, you still are, have the great ideas, and you still know how to do things, but you don't have to do it in a dominating way. You can do it in a more nurturing way, taking the whole team with you and letting the whole team grow with you. And I think that would help the women kind of look, the women that are looking up to that role model, see that it's okay to do it that way. And I think that also puts upon that leader or the role model to allow the other women to take certain roles too. So again, we talked about this in our meetings, we talk about it in our V-Stripe meetings. If I say, I'm already overwhelmed, I have that many, and somebody reaches out to me and says, would you like to do this? And I'm like, well, I can't, I think I don't have the time for this, or I know somebody who would be great. And, promoting that person, that junior person, or somebody that, would be great at doing and helping them grow into that role. So again, you're kind of training the junior or your women under you to kind of start taking those roles too.
So one of the other questions we have in the box in the chat is, what would your recommendations when reaching out to women in science about entrepreneurship be? Is there a better way to successfully drive their interest? And that ties into what my next kind of question for the panel, just in terms of what are your organizations doing to empower women? And I know Bio Nebraska is really focusing on this entrepreneurship piece. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Absolutely. So that was a really important topic to cover to our committee to cover this year. So that's a huge focus of ours. We just aren't seeing a lot of women in entrepreneurship. We're not seeing, you look at venture capitalists, there's 2% of them are run by women. And so we actually just did a webinar discussing this with amazing resources. So there are a lot of really great resources out there that exist, whether it be UNMed, Unitech, some things happening at the chamber. I mean, there's a huge list of things that are happening. What we also did in our entrepreneurship series was talk about some of the barriers that women face to entrepreneurship. And it just so happens that a lot of those barriers are what we've already discussed so far today. And looking at Bio Nebraska as well, what we're hoping to do is bring all of those resources together. So it's easier for women to find opportunities that exist in Nebraska.
Cool. What are some of the other organizations? Maybe talking a little bit more about We Strive and what you're working on.
Right, so I'll start. Please, Dr. Rathore, just jump in. So most of the organizations now, first is to recognize it, right? Be aware that there is a problem. That's the first and foremost step. Once you have that, it's now collecting the data. So one thing University of Nebraska is doing right now, I was actually part of applying for a grant for that, is to really collect all of the data, the direct and detailed data, because it's not only about what is publicly available, but also in terms of demographics, in terms of impressions, doing needs assessment, really understanding your employee population and what the needs are, right? Because when we look at national data, we know, for example, lack of mentorship, it's a great need, and that it's a topic that keeps coming back over and over. But that's not the only need, right? We need maternity leave policy changes, right? Another topic, and for example, is the Citizenship Tasks. So we just did a study with over 400, those were all women physicians. And we asked them about citizenship tasks. So those are tasks that are important for organizations, but they bring no direct advancement for your individual career, such as being invited to be on brochures, being invited to pose for photos, pick someone at the airport, or attend a meeting that you don't have a formal title for, but because you're a woman or you're a woman of color or a Latina, you have to be there to represent that population. And that takes up time from your work duties, and therefore you're not getting promoted. Therefore, you're not reaching out your metrics, right? For an organization to be mindful that those tasks exist and that they actually result in they deprive women and women of color from their work duties when compared to the male counterparts. Also creating task forces, right? So that's something else that University of Nebraska is doing right now. We started a gender equity task force comprised of leaders, senior leaders, most of the white males, right? But also including everyone else in the leadership below. This way we can have the needs, we can hear what all of the levels are saying and what we can do to improve those, right? Workshops, training. So this panel that you were hosting right now is an example, right? Hosting a Picture of Scientists movie and talking about those things, bringing the DEI discussion to the table and really reaching to students, graduates, trainees, right, and attendings as well, or faculty and leadership. Those would be just a few of the strategies that can be done.
Right. I guess I can chime in and just say a couple things about what UNO is doing. One really interesting result of what our Assistant Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, she provided a little bit more structure in terms of the requirements for search committees for faculty positions a couple of years ago. Dr. Candace Batten did this. And basically, what she wanted to do was ensure that at each level of the search, that all candidates in that level were given fair consideration. And she did that by checking at each stage and looking at some of the different characteristics and making sure that it matched with the overall pool of candidates and things like that. And just in the first year, it really changed the diversity demographics and the gender demographics of the faculty that we actually hired here at UNO. So I think putting some more guidelines into things like faculty searches or searches in leadership positions could be quite helpful in the future. Also at UNO and other institutions and U Central as well, I believe we've all received chief diversity officers within the last few years, and hopefully we'll see some strategic initiatives to help address some of these issues, not just at the faculty level, but at the leadership level as well, in addition to what everyone else has mentioned.
I want to just make sure that everyone saw in the chat what Dr. Miari Conti wrote. She's an amazing resource. She's the one who led our last webinar. Please reach out to her if you have entrepreneurship specific questions. Not only is she aware of what's happening specifically at UNIMED, she has a really great pulse on what's happening across the state. So thank you for adding that, Catherine. That's super helpful.
We had another interesting comment just in the Q&A from Dr. Rosalie Eworth, a Dean Emeritus from UNMC College of Nursing, who had just recognized, I see you all seen it now, or most of you have, that 3 of you just are using your first name in your identification box there and just pointing out to use your credentials in there. I think that's a really interesting and meaningful comment about us as women. Is there anything else anyone wants to share about initiatives that are being worked on?
I think Priscilla gave a great, overview of all the initiatives that we're doing at UNMC, and we're kind of rolling that out into Children's Hospital too, because we're faculty at both. But just to that, I'm not an entrepreneur, but just, whether it be entrepreneurship, starting something new, or promoting or progressing in your career, I think one thing that we all feel that is lacking, and it might be, again, you don't have enough time because of your other commitments, but networking. I think we all fall behind in networking, and especially with the pandemic, with the isolation, where we're not just seeing each other in the hallways now, and we have to make a special effort to reach out. That can be something that can really help, promote or start or make something successful. So again, reaching out to people who are in positions, and for those people who are already in leadership positions, trying to help, somebody who's starting new, or like we talked about, even, women or girls in undergrad or even high school level. And I know we collaborate with Girls Inc. and other programs in, the Omaha and other communities to try to, say, be role models, or say, if we can do it, it's doable, and we can progress, and we can reach much higher, positions. It's not, undoable, and just guiding them through that. Again, that networking, I think, is something that we can all do a better job at.
I agree that COVID's been very difficult in that networking piece. We had a lot of big plans for 2020, kicked off the year with an emotional intelligence workshop that we partnered with ICANN for, just to develop future leaders in STEM. And that was sold out, so exciting, and planning a big breakfast in Lincoln and all these plans across the state. And of course, we had to put those all on hold. Of course, we pivoted and began offering online events and doing the best that we can there. But when I talk to people, they want that networking piece. They want a mentor, and oftentimes as well, I find when I talk to people, they don't even know that maybe Bio Nebraska exists, or these programs at UNMC or UNO. They're not even aware of these resources, or they might not know how to ask for a mentor, or, networking might be awkward in certain spaces. And so that's something that we really try. I think that's one thing that we try to do well, is create that platform so people can connect. So, in relation with so many things that people have said, you meet somebody and you might reach out to that person to help you address something difficult that you're going through at work. Everybody that I talk to wants this. It isn't the most easy to access, and not because we're not doing it, because might not be awareness to that. And so that's something we're really trying to increase at Bio Nebraska.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to add, it does really make a difference, if think about, when again, it might not be one-on-one networking, but, if you're on, or you're part of a search committee, think about the women that would be great for it, and, include them. And even if they're not thinking about it, you can say, hey, you know what, you would be great for this position. Same thing with, I see a lot of journals, all the editors are usually older professors, men, and, we don't always get invited to be on the journals. So I think recently the American Academy of Neurology had their elections, and we have a women neurology group, and they said, you know what, I'm standing up for this position. If you think I'm worthy, vote for it. And 4 out of the 5 positions are women now. So, so I think if we can, because there's no question about the credentials and the, being equally qualified. It's just, getting that network and reaching out and supporting each other, or reaching out to others for support. So it can really make a difference.
Here's another question from our Q&A chat. Where and how can we as women safely reach out for help with regards to our mental health and responsibilities? And I know we were kind of talking about that in terms of networking and peer support. Is anyone aware of other resources that are out there?
Well, the University of Nebraska has benefits that include mental health resources. So we're using, I believe it's bestcare.org, and there were a lot of really nice resources on we'll call it COVID landing page, for lack of the term that is being used now. But otherwise, I hope people feel comfortable reaching out to their supervisors and a colleague or someone. Because we have counseling on campus at UNO for a certain number of sessions that's free. But if you want to do confidential, we have bestcare.org or your physician. But reaching out, period, is the most important thing. I don't think people should be concerned about how mental health will impact their career. I mean, you don't want to broadcast all kinds of things to people you're supervising, but your supervisor should be able to guide you and separate that from your work performance.
Yeah, I would like to add that it really depends, right, where you work at. At the Med Center, we also have a collaboration with Arbor Counseling. So each employee receives, I think, 5 or 10 sessions for free. And they also have a hotline. Uh, I am assuming most of the organizations have something in those lines. So it would be first reach out to HR or your leaders and see what are the resources available. Another good opportunity could be in the associations you are part of. So if you are part of We Strive or AUW or any association related to your job specifically, they also have those resources. But also be mindful that it takes a lot of courage, and you are a strong person just to think about it and really seek for help. So even if you are not the person looking for help, be sure or ensure that you are encouraging your friends to do so, right? And providing that safe space. So if you don't have the relationship, or if your supervisor, if that person is actually the one causing your mental health issues, try to find a colleague or someone else that you can confide, and then encourage that person to seek for help. There are also national organizations, especially here in Nebraska, if it's related to harassment or abuse. We have the I'm blanking out on the name, but it's related to the Open Door Mission. They have also a hotline for that. If you, the Lydia Safe House. So they also have the number that you could call. They have attorneys available. So there are opportunities out there, but just to make sure that you are also a safe place to someone. This way we can also ensure that we are keeping this network and the safe environment for all of us.
How are you and your authentic self at work as a woman in a male-dominated industry? And do you feel inhibited to display your personality in any way?
I would like to say, I think I don't. I take my 100% self. I think there are some attributes that you have to, or you don't have to, but I think that I have to curb a little bit. So, for instance, sometimes I get the comment saying, "Oh, you're wearing really bright color today," and I'm like, "Well, I just want to elevate everybody's mood today. It's gloomy, and I'm gonna wear something bright so I can make everybody feel brighter today." So you get those comments, but I'm feminine, and I'm going to, my patients feel good that I made an effort, and I just didn't come up and tie my hair in a ponytail and come. I made an effort for them. But again, that part of where I feel I'm not always confrontational, especially for if there is something that's not going right. I won't always directly confront, and I feel maybe that might be part of it, that I could do better at bringing my 100 self and saying, no, it's okay for me to confront people and say, no, this is wrong and you shouldn't be doing it. So I think that's the only place that I haven't found the balance yet. And hopefully I can, we learn every day. So maybe in a few years, I will be 100%.
Any other thoughts?
I would say that I have done my best also to come to the table authentically throughout my career, especially a lot of work that I've done in the past has been in a mostly male environment. I oftentimes felt respected by my colleagues and that I was an important part of the conversation. But there's things that I look back, knowing what I know now and the experience that I have, I may have kept quiet if something made me uncomfortable, because I wanted to think, wanted my male colleagues to think that I was cool and I could, guy talk or whatever. So they'd say something and I'd be like, ha ha ha, moving on, let's get back to what we were talking. And I'd always try to bring it back without being confrontational, because that just, kind of puts you in a weird position. And so, looking back, there's certainly things that I would be doing different. And like Dr. Rathore says, there's, we just learn more and more every day. And I think, you know, one of the most empowering things we can do is really, you know, women sometimes tend to suffer from the imposter syndrome that was mentioned. We're often trying harder to be seen as equal. So that oftentimes sometimes mean people pleasing and you know, while I think I'm authentic, maybe I'm saying yes to things that I shouldn't be saying yes to because I have too much on my plate. And so to make sure everyone knows how hard I'm working, I'm like, yeah, I can do that. Sure, I can do that. But I think one of the most empowering things that we can ultimately get to is being able to say no, and really setting boundaries for ourselves, whether it's work life or, you know, things we need to do personally and for our families.
I would agree. At the beginning, it was hard, especially being an early career in a male dominant industry and environment. You really need to sometimes hide your authenticity so you can reach a position, but then you learn that that's not the right way. And you learn appropriate alternatives on how to really being authentic without crossing any boundaries or without, you know, appearing aggressive. One thing I do want to mention is we also need to be mindful that sometimes we are not allowed to be authentic, not because of the equity per se, but because of the work. So for instance, if we work in a wet lab, most of the scientists, right, with cell culture or with surgeries, there's no way you can, right, be authentic with your clothes or with your hair because it's just the way that the environment, right, requires you to. However, I want also you to be mindful that there are leaders that currently are working on changing some policies to ensure authenticity. So for example, Monday, we had a great talk about the hair of women of color. I don't know if any of you had the chance to attend, but that's a big challenge for women of color because of their hair. We know that a lot of people are being, you know, fired because they cannot use the hair the way they want, for example, right? And I'm not the right person to speak about that. I'm just, you know, giving you the information I heard. But there are people right now changing policy in the Senate, you know, our Congress, people that are trying to create a policy to make that inclusivity. So there are people out there, you know, if there is a need for you, you're feeling you're not being authentic enough because of a lack of support, bring that up. You know, talk to your leaders, talk to your supervisor, and maybe you can start a change from there.
I think one thing, I can't say for sure exactly where I heard this, but you know, it's something that was mentioned before is just when it comes to mental health or being safe, sometimes you have to be aware of your surroundings. And so I know that we always want to be authentic at all times, but sometimes I think that to protect ourselves, there is a level of acceptance we can accept, a protection of ourselves that we need to accept. So sometimes, you know, while an attempt to be authentic, it might not be the most safe space, and it's okay to keep yourself safe.
I would just say, as long as you're comfortable with it, you know, you shouldn't feel, you know, that you're being somebody else. And again, even if you have to hide, you know, we all have certain strengths and weaknesses. And if, you know, to be successful or to be respected and appreciated at work, if you have to hide certain weaknesses, that's okay. Just keep working on improving those, and you don't have to expose it all. So I would agree.
You know, we do have another question in the chat, just following up on the subject matter of microaggressions, and, you know, including when you're seeing them happen towards colleagues, and if there are tangible examples of how to help change toxic male culture in some workplaces. And, you know, it's a difficult, slow change, I think, in a lot of cases. And it means building allies with male colleagues too, or other people willing to help stand up as well, and not just female support. But are there additional thoughts on this microaggression issue and how to change workplace culture?
Well, I think one thing that's important is for leaders, women and males, we need to make sure that we're supportive of all individuals and don't show favoritism or treat people wrongly ourselves. So I think that's really important. And also, as leaders, we're in a position to call out behavior that is not acceptable. And we need to make sure we do that through the appropriate channels. So one example, I'm not sure if this is the type of treatment that this question is referring to, but one example that I can give is several times when I've seen on different committees that the representation doesn't include women at all, that I said something to leadership. And I'll tell you, sometimes changes were made to those committees and other times they weren't made. I think we're making progress. And so I keep speaking up until I get tired of it. So those are just little things, but oftentimes kind of like what I mentioned earlier, maybe it was a really bad oversight. Maybe it wasn't, but either way, if no one speaks up and we just complain to each other, then no change will be made. So I think we want to make sure that we're not afraid to speak up appropriately and ask for change when we do notice behaviors or any situation that isn't set up the way it should be.
I agree with Sara. I think if we just take it and complain to each other, it's not going to change. And it is hard to confront that person or confront that situation. Sometimes at that time, you're almost shell-shocked, or you're like, did I perceive it right or did I not perceive it right? And it's okay if you address it later too. I've had times where, I've mulled over it for days and I just can't put it to rest. And I've gone to the person and said, when you said this to me, maybe you didn't mean it this way, but I did not appreciate it, or I felt this. And, a lot of times it's just miscommunication. Or something that person didn't even think about. So I think Priscila had given great examples of like maybe just repeat it. And I know I don't have the presence of mind all the time at that time, and it's okay to go back later and say this was something that I didn't like, or what did you mean when you said this? Maybe I'm not taking it correctly. So not being confrontational, but just saying this is what I thought. Is it this what you meant? And if it is, it wasn't appropriate.
One thing I've heard is try to address it in a way that if you made a bad choice, you would want it brought to your attention, and talk, in that way. There's another question just about resources, TED Talks, podcasts, books that are good out there, and including like dealing with microaggressions from other women that may be in leadership or maybe colleagues. So any resources that you'd like to share with the group? And A Picture of Scientist is one of those films. Like I said, I'm hoping that we can get a viewing. It is something where you have to have access to a viewing of it, most of which are virtual right now. And so that's one thing Nebraska Cures is looking at, hoping to bring to the public soon.
I'll take a brief shot at this one. And it kind of ties into what, the question previous as well. It's really awareness. A lot, we might experience microaggressions or discrimination from other women. I mean, I think that's definitely happened to many of us, where you'd hoped it would be an ally, but it feels more competitive, and that's really hard to deal with. So I think that, providing awareness to, for example, BioNebraska members, we have a board who is incredibly supportive of women in STEM, incredibly excited to see it grow. A lot of the folks on our board are men leading companies, and they are so excited that we're able to offer programs that they just did not have the capacity to do before, or bringing maybe things to their attention that they might not have been aware of. I remember somebody telling me the story of working in a lab. She was the only woman, and she was pumping and she had to go into a closet, and she didn't even think that that was something that she could ask for. And in being in a male dominated environment, they weren't even aware that that was something that they had to provide because that wasn't their experience. And so it's a ton of awareness, advocacy work for people, women and men in leadership positions, possibly training that companies can do through HR, for anti-bias training, anti-discrimination. Specifically for BioNebraska, we've been keeping a library of all of our past talks. So that's definitely a resource if anyone is interested, to make sure to follow upcoming events that we have and past events that, talk about being a woman and navigating some challenges through that, so you can be successful in your careers. As far as certain podcasts or books, there's, I can't think of anything at the top of my head. I consume many of those things, but maybe the others on the panel might have some good resources there.
Yeah, I would like to add and encourage you to participate and join the associations related to either your employee or in Nebraska. So, for example, if you are in the Med Center, WISTRIVE would be a great resource for you. For UNO, I know that they have the GWIMS, which is also an association that relates to and really advances policy changes for gender equity. If you think about Nebraska per se, there's AUW, which is the American Association of University Women. They have a free workshop on negotiation that is available to anyone who goes to their website and just sign up. We also hosted a free or available to the public talk last fall on negotiating not only salaries, but also your time, negotiating, with your kids, negotiating with your spouse. So there are a lot of resources out there. But I would advise you to, or encourage you to really look for those organizations. If you are available to mentor, look for the Mentor Nebraska. There are so many organizations such as Girls Inc., and they really promote the pipeline. So if you're available to give, be a mentor. But if you're a student, also look for those opportunities to be a mentee and find someone on the other side. I know that Amanda and I have discussed before, maybe they ask a scientist or increasing a partnership. So be at the lookout for those opportunities and be sure that you're showing yourself, right? Be out there, participate in panels like this one. If you are a social media advocate, be on Twitter, that's very professional for people in healthcare, and you make connections with you get opportunities that other universities are hosting public talks in Zoom, so you can participate. So it really depends on what you're looking for in terms of this mentorship, but just join those societies, be aware of those things, and you'll be able to find the opportunities you're looking for.
I did just drop in the chat links to the different organizations, BioNebraska, We Strive. I put the UNO STEM Women in STEM organization in there too, as resources. I'm also dropping in there now a follow-up survey from this, where you're free to share ideas with us for programming you'd like to see or additional resources. Nebraska Cures is very interested in this topic and helping to further women in research. Whether that means helping with research, helping with mentorship and programming and collaboration with everyone on here. We are hitting that top of the hour, and so I think we will wrap it up now. And I want to thank all of our special guests, our panelists, for participating. Do any of you have any final thoughts you'd like to share or words of encouragement for fellow women in STEM?
Well, I would like to thank you, Amanda, for doing this. I think, like we said, the momentum is there. We need to increase the visibility. The women in science, or women in general, shouldn't be the special case. We're more than 50% of the workforce. So thank you for doing this. And, if anybody, I don't know if our emails are on there, but if anybody needs anything, definitely reach out to us. You have the WeStrive link, or even directly to one of us if you want to reach out. We would be happy to help.
Just one quick thing to add. BioNebraska is still pretty early on in their Nebraska Women in STEM program. So please, we are always open for dialogue. I am very interested in hearing everybody's thoughts. It's the feedback from all of the women in these STEM professions that are really going to help make this program successful. We want to make sure that we're providing content and presentations and events that are useful to you. So feel free as well to reach out.
I just want to say thank you and encourage all women, if you have the opportunity to have a leadership position, to really consider it.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. Just remember that you can do it. And if someone tells you no, just prove them wrong. It feels much better at the end.
Terrific. Perfect words to leave on. Thank you everyone for attending. We will be sharing this on our website. So if you have people you would like to share it with in your lives, professionally or otherwise, then please do so. Thank you all.
Thank you so much.